With all the craziness that's going on in college football, there's one person that has an advantage that no one else does, and that's Deion Sanders.
You are Locked On Buffs, your daily podcast on the Colorado Buffaloes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Buffs. I am your host, Kevin Borba. Today's episode of Locked On Buffs is brought to you by our sponsors over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. We're also brought to you by the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day for free and available wherever you get your podcast. So thank you for making me your first listen. We're talking about an advantage that Deion Sanders has that no one else does. Now, obviously, there's Nick Saban. He was the GOAT. He was all this and that, but arguably, he was the only one that even came close to the advantage that Coach Prime has, which is his brand, his notoriety, and his overall coolness. When you might be like, oh my gosh, the coolness, that doesn't win football games. And you're right. Coolness and brands don't win football games, but they help you attract the talent that does win football games. Just looking at, and this is not the best metric to go off of, but this is a metric that just compares Coach Prime to the other coaches around college football. On Instagram, which for those of you who don't realize, college kids care about. They care about having more followers. They care about growing their brands. They care about growing their name and having a name that people recognize on social media and getting brand deals. Deion Sanders has 4.7 million followers. Now, I would consider coaches like Lane Kiffin as the next most popular coaches, which he has 85,000 followers. You go to Steve Sarkisian over at Texas. He has 59. You could go with Kalen DeBoer, the new Alabama coach, 50,000. Dan Lanning at Oregon, who I think Colorado could have had a good rivalry with, 58,000. There's not really many coaches out there in college football that can even come close to the brand that Coach Prime has. And that's obviously because he was such a successful football player or athlete in general. It's one of those things where he has to use that to his advantage, and I think he will. Over the last couple of days, he's been talking about, or we've seen clips of him talking to RG3 about how crazy it is in college football to get a transfer. And one of the things that stood out to me was he said $50,000 will get you a walk-on. Now, obviously, I don't know the rates on all players, 5-star to walk-on to 1-star to 2-star, whatever it may be. But I think Coach Prime, who dabbles in the portal a little bit, knows what he's talking about. And so he realizes that getting guys out of the portal is not an easy task. And for a program like Colorado, who only has, let's see, 3 players in the top 50 and then 4 football players in the top 125 athletes in the top NIL 100. It is obviously not Colorado's strong suit, the NIL rankings. And even then, their 3 players are his 2 sons, who obviously they're good in their own right as athletes. They're good in their own right as football players. But having that Sanders last name does help a little bit in boosting their value. And then Travis Hunter, who is arguably he's a unicorn in football. We haven't seen many Travis Hunters who consistently play offense and defense every single down. So obviously there's a lot of differences between those 3 and the rest. And then Cormani McClain was a 5-star who chose to go to Colorado as a part of Deion Sanders' first class. And so I was thinking, what can Deion Sanders do to kind of help propel this program? It's to use his brand, and he's been doing it already. He appears on shows, he appears on podcasts, draft shows, he appears on TV shows, he appears in commercials, and there's not many coaches that do that, and a lot of coaches want to focus on football. But if you're at a program like Colorado who can't compete with the Texases or the Georgias or whoever else is dominating the NIL space, because if you look at the NIL space right now, there's a few commonalities. One, at sons of athletes, so Bronny James, Shedeur Sanders, those are the top. Arch Manning, he's a nephew of famous athletes, but there's also certain programs that stand out. It's Texas, it's Alabama, it's Oregon, it's Georgia, Tennessee, LSU, Duke is another one on the basketball side. Those are the same programs that are consistently seen throughout the NAL world that are dominating space. Colorado is not yet there. I think Coach Prime will get more investment into the program by being there long-term and building the program. But for now, he has to rely on his brand. Secondly, I think a lot of people are going to get caught up in saying I'm saying rely on social media and popularity to kind of build a team. And to an extent, yes, I'm aware having 4.5 million or 4.7 million followers on Instagram doesn't win you 6 games and get you into a bowl game. It doesn't even get you anything really. It really gets you nothing. Maybe some cool uniforms, some celebrities coming to your games, but Again, celebrities coming to the games, Instagram followers, Twitter followers, YouTube subscribers. Those are all things that interest college recruits. But you get their interest and you have to keep them there. And the best way to do that is to win games. And if you attract more talent with your brand that other coaches can't simply compete with, that helps in a major way. And honestly, Coach Prime's brand is a talent, or it's a brand that, one, he's famous because he's such an elite athlete. You look around college football, there's other former players. I'm not going to deny that. There's obviously the Josh Heupels of the world. There's the Scott Frost of the world when he's coaching. Nick Saban was a former defensive back over at, I think, West Virginia, I believe it was. And it's just one of those things where it's like you have a lot of coaches who played football at the highest level, or at the highest college level. I mean, he was a defensive back at Kent State. He's from West Virginia. Excuse me, had to correct myself there. But there's a lot of former players who dabbled. There's a lot of former players who were solid players, or former coaches who were solid players that just didn't make it to that next level. Coach Prime made it to the highest level possible, and his pitch to every recruit should be, and transfer portal player, and this is kind of how he combats NIL until Colorado's catching up, is one, I was one of the best to ever do it, and you could come learn from me. And two, you will have a chance to build a brand as big as anybody's in college football. Look at Travis Hunter. Obviously, Travis Hunter, number one overall recruit. He was probably going to be famous wherever he goes. I'm not taking that away from him. He comes to Colorado. He has a massive brand. He got 100,000 subscribers on YouTube just by delaying his transfer announcement. And I think Colorado has really honed in on maximizing value on and off the field. And I think that's an advantage that not a lot of programs have, because a lot of programs are, and as they should be, are focused on the field product and letting their NIL people off the field handle it. And Colorado does not have that luxury right now. So, as I've been saying, Coach Prime's brand, the appeal of being at Colorado, as they are one of the most watched teams in college football, even though they were 4-8, that's something that's hard to turn down. And that's something that Coach Prime needs to capitalize on. And in order to do that, he brought more talent in this offseason. He wins more games. You win more games, you're bringing in more top talent anyway. Those guys like Charles Lester's at Florida State, or whoever, maybe whatever recruit that they missed out on, those guys may consider coming to Colorado once they see them winning more games, because outside of the fact that Coach Prime's there, they're going to have a chance to be as famous as any athlete in college football because they're on Coach Prime's team. And I think that's really something that is hard to turn down. I would imagine it'd be very hard to look at Deion Sanders in the face and be like, yeah, I don't want to play for you. And so the more games they win, the more high level players they bring in. And he's going to keep bringing in those borderline high level players because of his brand. And it's going to continue to happen. And Colorado needs to make sure that they don't lose him, because if they lose Coach Prime, they lose the brand and they lose the talented players that are interested in coming there. This episode of Locked On Buffs is brought to you by our sponsors over at FanDuel. The NFL regular season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is super easy to use, and there's so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays, or you can find bets in the new Explorers tab, or you can make parlays in the new Parlay Hub, which is the best way to find the popular parlays around the FanDuel community. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. Again, that's FanDuel.com/LOCKEDON and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel is the official partner of the NFL. Welcome back to Locked On Buffs. I appreciate you guys for making me your first listen of the day. I'm talking about the perfect defensive coordinator for Colorado. I think there's 3 categories that stand out to me. 1, stopping the run. 2, culture building. And 3, discipline. I think a lot of people are thinking about, what schemes are they going to bring? Or how does he recruit? And I think recruiting is important. But again, you have Coach Prime at the helm. Recruiting is not going to be that difficult to get guys to come want to play for you. But it is going to be difficult to convince guys to stay there if they continue to see what was the mess that Colorado had last year on defense. So obviously, I named one thing that was on the football field. Stopping the run is as important as it gets. The Big 12 probably has 4 or 5 of the best running backs in the country next season, and Colorado is going to encounter quite a few of them. You look at their schedule for the 2024 season, and Nebraska could usually run the ball. It's not really a shock to see all these teams where it's like, Colorado can't stop the run, we're going to run it down their throats. And you look at teams like North Dakota State. I think people thought they'd be a bigger favorite over, or a bigger underdog against Colorado. No, they could run the ball. Colorado can't stop the run. Nebraska is decent at running the ball. Arizona had a good running back last year, but Utah runs the ball well. Oklahoma State has Ollie Gordon. Kansas State runs the ball well. Kansas has Devin Neal. Texas Tech, they have Brooks. They have a lot of talented running backs. So having someone who puts an emphasis on stopping the run and kind of letting your defensive backs, Travis Hunter, Cormani, DJ McKinley, whoever it may be at the corner spots and then the safeties, letting them eat because the defensive backs can stop the run, or the defensive line, can stop the run. Huge priority. Then you look at culture. I think Colorado had a culture problem last year. I've talked about it a few times. They had a problem where as soon as they got punched in the mouth, they did not know how to respond. They did not know how to bounce back. We saw countless times. You look at games like Stanford. Obviously, the Stanford game is a dramatic example of this. But Colorado was up 29-0, and they had no ability to kind of, as soon as Stanford started building momentum, Colorado kind of shut down. It was like, oh my gosh, like you knew Stanford was going to come back. You could tell because Colorado had no answer. And this is the whole team. It's not just the defense in particular, but when you're spotted a 29-point lead, you kind of have to get a stop or two, and they were getting any stops. You look at a game like Oregon State. Oregon State was a closer game than on the scoreboard and a closer game than people realize. Colorado had a chance to win, but their defense, again, gave up a crucial touchdown to end the half. Now, obviously, there was some offensive play calling that went into that as well, but the defense, again, they couldn't build off of momentum. They couldn't even build momentum. And I think this part is part of the culture problem. I think when you bring in so many different guys from so many different programs, some of them who have played, some of them who haven't, it's kind of hard to all be on the same page. Some guys are there for personal reasons. Some guys are wanting to boost their stock. Some guys simply just don't want to be the guy that's at fault. Or some guys just want to be on the team. It's one of those things where some guys are just happy to be on the team. Colorado had they had a few players, but they had minimal players, not enough guys who could step up and be like, okay, we have to do this as a unit. They had a lot more guys that were worried about, you know what? It's not me making the mistake. It's so-and-so over here. You saw it on the sidelines against Stanford. There was players yelling at each other. There was players yelling at Coach Prime because they were blaming someone else. They weren't taking responsibility for what was going wrong. They were blaming so-and-so over there who maybe missed an assignment or didn't help over the top or maybe opened up a rushing lane. They weren't being like, you know what, that's my bad. I should have been there too, or I should have seen this look and adjusted. That was not what Colorado was about. So they need someone who could come in, kind of get rid of the nonsense, get rid of the culture problems. We saw it in the documentary. Bishop Thomas, the Florida State transfer, he was kind of projected or shown in the documentary as someone who was going to be a difference maker for Colorado. He had 6 total tackles. I would say the biggest difference he made outside of being entertaining in the documentary was he came in to block as a fullback a couple times. He was not what they were expecting on defense. And he had the same issues. They would show him in the documentary and be like, dude, what is your problem? Like, you know what you need to do. And he's like, yeah, I know what I need to do. I just need to do my thing, keep my head down and quit talking. And that's an answer to get someone to shut up. That's not an answer to get someone to help solve the problem. And I think the culture building aspect of this defensive coordinator needs to come in and eliminate the mentality that, like, if I say the right things, I'm okay. Or if I say the right things, or if I do whatever I want to do, but I'm kind of just going with the flow, that's the right thing. They need to have a cohesive unit. They need to have all 11 on the same page. And then lastly, discipline issues. Colorado was one of the most penalized teams in the country last season. It was truly atrocious. It was in the Stanford game alone. I think they had 4 or 5 penalties where they were penalized for having too many players on the field at once. You rarely see it. It's kind of one of those things where sometimes the offense will catch the defense off guard. Sometimes the offense will kind of snap it quickly while the defense is substituting. It's like, okay, the safety or the nickel didn't get off the field on time. No, Colorado had 4 or 5 instances where they had too many people on the field. One of them was after a TV timeout. So it was like a minute and a half long. They had to sit there, figure out the personnel, boom, 13, 14 players on the field. And then you look at where they ranked. Colorado had a total of 854 penalty yards this past season on 107 penalties. They averaged 71.17 penalties per game, which was second worst in the country behind New Mexico. In terms of penalties per game, they had the third most with 107. And then in terms of penalty yards per game, they were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11th with 854. That's not where you want to be. This coordinator needs to come in, and I think this is partially with the culture. I think this is partially with finding who the right guys are on defense. I think that's kind of the issue they had last year too. They need to be disciplined. They need to realize what personnel is going to be in what scenario. I think it's just overall getting smarter at football. Sometimes they need to realize, okay, it's third and long. Are we going to have our run based defense in there? No, it's third and long. Like they in a passing scenario, obviously. Sometimes they will run the ball, but it's a passing scenario. We're not going to have all of our run stoppers in or whatever it may be defensively. And I think this goes to the secondary as well. There's a lot of holding penalties, but the penalties that hurt Colorado the most were the ones that were preventable. It was too many men on the field. It was late hits. Travis Hunter kind of gave Stanford away back into the game with the penalty. I think it was unnecessary roughness. He pushed a receiver for no reason. I think it was Arden Walker one game, late hit on the quarterback, saved a drive. You just have to not put yourself in those situations. And I think that's kind of a disciplinary issue. Now, whether Charles Kelly wasn't emphasizing that, I'm sure he was, but this new coach clearly needs to look at what happened last year and put more of an emphasis on like, okay, this team has a clear problem with being disciplined. This team has a clear problem with doing things the right technique, doing things at the right time. And I have to step in and do that. So that's what makes the perfect defensive coordinator for me. Obviously, Deion Sanders is looking, to the NFL level to find the replacement for Charles Kelly. Who it's going to be, we don't know yet, but he needs to make sure that he's emphasizing stopping the run, building up the culture, which multiple players have already said was a problem at Colorado. It was just hard to blend with all the new guys. And then 3, discipline on defense. No stupid penalties, no illegal substitutions, no after the play, oh, you shove someone into the bench, or after the play, you tackled a quarterback who was basically an inch away from the out of bounds line. Like, you can't have that anymore. So those are the 3 things that make the perfect defensive coordinator, in my opinion. When we come back, we're going to be talking about the controversial Paris trip and why many people are criticizing it, but it was the perfect move for Shilo and Shedeur Sanders. But first, a word from our sponsors over at Game Time. You shouldn't have to worry about when you're buying tickets to your next big event. Game Time is a fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. They have last-minute tickets, flash deals, zone deals, and it's easy to find and buy tickets for any kind of event in your area. Best part is you get to see the seat from before you even buy the ticket. You click on the seat where you might be interested in sitting. You can move it around on your phone and be like, oh, this is what my view would be. They have deals on tickets right up to the start of the event and even an hour after it starts. It's the place to find last minute seats. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDON, locked on, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Appreciate you guys for tuning in to Locked On Buffs and making me your first listen of the day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Shedeur and Shilo were in Paris, and it has caused quite the stir. They didn't miss a practice. They didn't miss a game. They didn't miss a very important Colorado event. They missed the first team meeting of the offseason. And so a lot of people are kind of getting on them because it's like, what kind of standard is that setting? What kind of standard is that setting if the 2 of your best players and 2 of the coach's sons are out in Paris doing a fashion show for Louis Vuitton and meeting with Pharrell Williams and hanging out with Quavo? You know what standard it sets? I talked about at the beginning. It's a brand building standard. Colorado does not compete with a lot of programs in the NIL space. We know that. We've established that. The best way for these guys to maximize their NIL value is to go to Colorado, ball out, and people will come to them with deals. We've seen it with Shedeur. We've seen it with Shilo. They balled out. They got deals. Obviously, their dad being Deion Sanders helps, but it only helps so much. It really does. His daughter's on the basketball team, and this isn't to shade her, but she's not one of the key contributors for the number 5 team in the country. So she doesn't have NIL deals flooding in like her 2 brothers, and she'll have the opportunity to get there eventually. But people need to realize when you're in college football, and specifically, I would say this applies more towards Shilo than it does Shedeur. Sometimes you are at your most valuable as an athlete than you will ever be in your life. Not everybody goes pro. I think it's like 2% of college athletes go pro, which is great for them. And even then, the average career in the NFL, the NFL stands for not for long. That's what they call it. Not the National Football League. It stands for not for long. So you get to the NFL, and not everybody's having 10-year careers or 20-year careers like Tom Brady. So if you could go to college, play football, get an education, and also maximize your NIL brand, that's a pretty big deal. And so, one, I think people are getting caught up in the fact that it's Shedeur and Shilo Sanders. So it's like the coach's sons. It's you look at it from the perspective of which helmet they'll be putting on. It's a Colorado helmet. If you're a recruit and you see these two guys going to Paris and walking in a fashion show for Louis Vuitton and getting these cool endorsement deals, that entices you to go to Colorado. It also entices you to it motivates you to maximize your brand. So the best way to maximize your brand is to play well. So it motivates people. Whether people want to admit it or not, young athletes are motivated by money, the NFL, which is another way to make money, and growing their brand. It's all about growing your brand. And this is the best way to do it. And so people getting caught up on the fact that they missed one meeting. Relax. They were back on Wednesday or whenever the day after the fashion show was. They didn't miss much. It was Coach Prime establishing the rules. And you know who probably exemplifies those rules better than everyone else on that team? Shedeur and Shilo Sanders. If you guys didn't watch the Amazon documentary, I urge you to go watch it because Shedeur Sanders is one of the best leaders that I've seen from a college quarterback standpoint. He's telling people what routes they need to run. He's telling people where they need to be. He's encouraging his teammates. He's also holding his teammates accountable. He's also not throwing his teammates under the bus. I think a lot of people got caught up in Coach Prime throwing the offense line on the bus, but someone who never said anything throughout the entire process was Shedeur Sanders. He could have just as easily said, I could probably win us games if I wasn't getting sacked 7 times a game. So Shedeur Sanders is a great leader, and people need to realize that. And so this Paris trip where it's like, oh my gosh, the program, what kind of precedent is this setting? It's setting a precedent that if you are valuable enough, if you are building a brand that's popular enough, and you can also represent Colorado in the biggest way possible, you'll get to do that. Now, obviously, if this was like a mid-season thing where it's like, okay, I'm going to miss a game to go walk in the fashion show, that's when I would be like, okay, this is an issue. But I don't foresee that happening. It's a January meeting. They're not even practicing in pads. They're not even practicing with coaches. They're doing winter workouts. There is no football with coaches happening where it's like, okay, they missed a practice. They're not getting better. They missed a team meeting, kind of introducing the new guys. I'm sure they'll come in and meet all of those new guys whenever the fashion show was over. I think it was Tuesday, so they came in Wednesday, we'll say, and they met everybody. It is really not that big of a deal. If anything, it says more about where Colorado is as a program, that they have athletes notable enough that are garnering these deals. Like, there was no Alabama players in that fashion show. There was no Washington or Georgia players or USC players this year. Caleb Williams was in the Hugo Boss fashion show last year, and there wasn't this much outrage. I think it's kind of the Sanders effect in the sense that people got to criticize everything they do. And I think it's also the fact that people don't like that a team that went 4-8 is as popular as it is. But again, going back to what we talked about earlier, it's the Deion Sanders brand. His brand propels athletes to market themselves, increase their value, and also it, in a way, will help them become better football players and better businessmen because they know what they need to do to get to certain points. So the Paris trip is being blown way out of proportion. Everyone needs to take a chill pill. It's not that big of a deal. They got an opportunity to market themselves. They wanted to be multidimensional as athletes, and they're doing just that. So everyone relax. I promise you, if it was a problem, I would say so. I would be very critical of it if it was a problem that I kind of thought was hurting the team, but I don't think it's hurting anybody on the team. If anything, it's bringing more eyes to Colorado, which will only help the players around them that ball out. And that's kind of the best way that they could use their platform for other people is bring more attention to themselves. And in essence, and in effect, they will bring more attention to the players around them. I appreciate you guys for tuning in to Locked On Buffs on this fine Friday. I hope you guys have a great weekend. I will see you guys on Monday. I hope you have a great and safe weekend. Stay warm, travel, do something fun. See you guys on Monday.